we're going to look back at several concepts that we covered during cultural anthropology, just by way of review, but also looking at them again from a communication perspective. And so this week, your reading takes you into in-groups and into networks and into cultural change. And so how do those relate to the task of becoming intercultural, but also, more importantly in this course, the task of communication? So just a review that we talked about the difference between individualism and collectivism. And by now, perhaps you're beginning to identify to the degree that you can what your culture, what your host culture is like. Are they more of an individualistic culture or more of a collectivist culture? And if you recall, we said most of the world lands in this middle section, somewhere between consultative individualism and contextual collectivism. Consultative individualism, we said, is where there are two or more in-groups that influence a person's behavior, and that in that your needs are met by various groups as needed, or perhaps more importantly, met by various individuals within the groups that you're related to. So your identity remains yourself. Your groups and the people you're connected to through those groups should help to shape your identity. They bolster your identity. They define different aspects of yourself, but you are yourself. You are a unique individual, and you celebrate that uniqueness, and you declare, this is who I am. And yet, because even in consultative individualism, we get our identity from other individuals and connected to other individuals and other groups, there are sometimes when our identity is threatened, or where we struggle to understand who we are because of confusing signals sent by other people in other groups, things that happen to us as we grow up that challenge our identity, the need to belong, and that sense that you aren't sure where you belong anymore. And that affects your identity, whether you're an individualist or collectivist. So the consultative individual, that comes from a connection to other individuals, and so you really want to get friends. But if you've come into a group that is highly contextual collectivist, in that group, there's a substantial influence by more than one in-group. It may be a very strong influence by one in-group and a large bit of overlap between those in-groups. But your needs are met by your relationship to those in-groups, and therefore your identity is found in your belonging to the group. It's not that your belonging to the group helps you to find who you are is the group that you belong to. And so that sense of belonging is very strong, and the contextual collectivist will feel more at loss outside of their in-group than individualists will. It's probably why some of you will find culture shock stronger, because if you have a strong core group of friends, a strong family group where you function a bit more collectivistically, then you're more likely to feel the loneliness and the distance from home and the sense of loss of who you are because your people are with you. So how does that affect communication? Well, if I'm highly collectivist, then my communication patterns tend to be centered on maintaining my relationships with my in-groups. I'm not looking for a wider reach. I'm not trying to connect with people who aren't like me. I'm trying to stay connected to the people I belong to. And that will keep me from interacting with visitors and foreigners as much as other people might. To the degree where you have that sense of satisfaction in your group, your belonging group, your in-group, why do you need other people in your life? Why do you need to connect with somebody new, some strange foreigner? It's actually one of the factors we see that when you move into a collectivist society, oftentimes the people who reach out in friendship to you are the people who are already marginalized within the group because they've been pushed out. And so they're looking for belonging and they'll attach to you. If I'm a strong collective, my groups meet my needs. Therefore, they're very important to me. And my network will be very tight, and I'll be directly connected to everyone in the group. I'll have a sense of relationship with everyone in the group. As a collectivist, I get that sense of belonging with the multiple groups that I may be a part of. And as I said before, those might overlap. There might be a huge degree of commonality. So some of the people in my different groups belong in other different groups that I belong to. And the more tribal the people are, the more likely it is that it pulls down to one strong collective and groupings within that collective, but a very strong sense of belonging as a whole. But I'm going to try as much as I can to stay connected with all these people. I have a lot of relationships that I need to keep up. If I see my uncle walking down the street, I can't just ignore him. I have to stop and go and visit with him just for a few minutes. Even though I'm going to be late to something I'm going to stop and say hi to my uncle because I can't afford to be disconnected from that group. If I see somebody from my church, I'm going to stop and I'm going to say hi. I'm not just going to wave across the street with them. I'm actually going to go over and take some time with them. And this is a communication pattern that we as Westerners, especially those who come from a more individualistic society, we have the ability to just wave and say hi from across the street. But the more collective you are, the more rude that will feel to the people of that culture. Trying to maintain all these relationships, your communication strategy is a strategy that maintains those relationships in whatever way possible. You'll keep the peace within that group. You won't stress those relationships. You'll actually ignore things that people do wrong. Now, that's not to say that people in collectivist groups don't get offended. They tend to get offended, build it up, hold it in, kind of stuff it, and then sometimes they just explode because it gets to be too much. But there's this tendency to want to make sure that everybody stays connected, stays happy, and I'm not going to do anything within my collectivist society to offend you. And so that collectivist communication policy means that you now, as a foreigner coming into that society, are on the outside of that. You're trying to get in an individualistic way by connecting with certain individuals and trying to become friends with the individuals. What you need to do is instead take a strategy of trying to become a part of a group. Whatever group you can become a part of. If you love exercise, find a gym and join the gym and find a group of friends within the gym and find a sense of belonging, and don't just meet one or two people, but talk to everybody there and become part of the group to the degree that they'll allow you to become part of the group. That's the same way with any social group. When you meet somebody on the street and you want to make that connection, you're trying to make a friendship with them. As that friendship grows, they'll want you to meet their family because that's how they live. That's their identity, is in their family. And so you'll want to spend time with their family, not just with them. And if they want you to come over to dinner regularly, you'll want to do that because you want to connect in with the whole group, not just with a few individuals. I look back in my time in the Philippines, and I wish I'd understood that better. I think it would have been so much easier to get inside the community had I understood how collectivist they were and how important it was to not just be a friend with an individual, but be a friend with an individual and their friends and their family and the groups that they belong to. Now, for us, we kind of play it differently. Individualists, which is what we more tend to be. The communication strategy is that we connect to our groups through key individuals, and the most important relationship we need to maintain is the one that we connect through. So I might have friendships, I might have acquaintances in several different groups, but I have key people within those groups that connect me to that group, and I maintain that relationship so that I can maintain my relationship within the group. If something happens to that person, I need to reconnect within the group because I may not be as plugged in as I think I am because I'm really only plugged into a few key individuals within the group. So my communication strategy is a little different. I'm going to be trying to communicate with a few people who keep me connected, hear what's happening in the group, and therefore I can maintain a lot of groups because I'm not individually connected to every member of every group. And they connect me to the other individuals. So it's not like I don't know those people and I'm not connected to those people, but not in the same way that collectivists would say I have to know and be connected to everybody in that group. This allows us, again, to have more groups to be connected to, whereas the collectivist is going to try to limit the number of groups that they're connecting with. One of the communication elements that comes in with the individualist view is that because you have a lot of groups, you tend to limit your communication strategy to the purpose of the group. In an individualist society, my friend group in the gym may not have any overlap with any other group that I'm a part of. And it does limit my communication because now I'm actually only talking to this group of people about the things that make us bond together within that context. So we keep our conversation very contextual. We talk about our workout plan. We talk about our weight goals. We talk about energy drinks. That conversation is very much centered around the purpose of the group. When I step out of that group, I leave that conversation behind. It's a dialect I use within that group, but I don't actually take that home. If I do, it gets really weird, right? Now, friendship group obviously is going to have a lot more crossover. Family's going to have a lot more crossover, but we also have all these groups that we maintain. And sometimes, as we said in cultural anthropology, one of the things about individualists is that we treat our church group the same way. We don't allow our church group into the rest of our life. And so they're really a group that talks about religious things and doesn't talk about anything else. And that's unfortunate. When you are working with a collectivist group, one of the things you will find is that as they begin to follow Jesus, it changes their relationships with other in groups that they're part of. Some of the networks they have begin to fall apart because people don't approve of that decision to follow Jesus. And the church then has to become for them that family. If they get ostracized from their family, the church needs to be a family. If they are no longer allowed to go to the gym because of this, does the church have any way for connecting them in with the social element that they got from being a part of that group? It may not be that the church is their gym, but now they have no friends. Their friends have left them. And so the church then becomes a surrogate family in many ways in a collectivist society. Whereas we tend to treat church more like just one of our in-groups that we go to and connect to. And that makes communication choices very different. I'm going to communicate in my in-groups as an individualist about the things I would communicate with, and I'm just not going to be talking about other things with them. In my church, I'll talk about churchy things. Your in-group shapes your identity. Collectivist identity is shaped by identification with a smaller number of groups with the goal of inclusion and solidarity in the group. That goal of inclusion in versus reference to creates a strong difference in the way we communicate. If you want to belong, then you align your language patterns to demonstrate that you want to belong, that you do belong. If you want to create a strong individualistic identity, you will borrow from the groups that you desire to belong to, but you'll adjust your language and your communication to demonstrate that you actually are an individual who can live without them, and that you also belong to other groups, and that you're more than just this group. And if they want to really know who you are, they need to know more about you, which means they need to know what some of your other interests are. A collectivist will already know your interests outside of the group because the significant overlap in membership between the groups. So to the degree you come from a more individualistic culture, you'll likely see people you meet in groups you gain access to as opportunities, but may not be committed to the depth of intimacy and relationship to truly belong. If we treat people just as opportunities to share the gospel, they don't feel that reciprocity from them. They don't feel that you're getting something from them. You're just giving something to them, and you're just using them to do what you want to do for your purposes. And they begin to feel that. They don't feel like you want to be their friend or want to be a part of the group or want to belong, because you just want to get in and tell them something. So if you're in a strongly collectivist society, you do need to build the relationships. You need to be committed to building those relationships. We need to consider not just doing short forays into those cultures, but consider the long-term investment in order to be really effective in a highly collectivist society. It takes relational commitment to become involved in these groups. All right, there's 3 different types of structural relationships also that occur within networks of relationships. One would be a network that would be organized kind of like a chain. And you see, it looks like what you would expect in an organizational chart of a corporate structure, but it also might be true of a chain of relationships in a highly stratified culture with somewhat of a caste system. And in this kind of a network, the information flows bidirectionally up and down the chain, but it doesn't flow across the chain. You see, there's not connections between the people sideways. There's only connections up and down. And so the policy of communication then is that if you want communication to flow, you need to get it up the chain and back down again. If you want other people to understand something, you have to get your communication to the top so that it can get disseminated back down through other people. You don't have the ability in that set of relationships that allows you to communicate laterally across that. So tight tribal groups might have that, probably not so much tribal groups as more of a patron-client relationship between people, where you have somebody in the group is a strong, wealthy, high caste landowner, the authority, and has to be the one that communication flows through. And the second one in the middle here is somewhat similar. It's the centrality one. This can be a network where there's a central person that communication has to flow through. And that's an interesting one. It's not necessarily that the people within that network don't talk to each other, but they have to demonstrate that the leader knows everything, that the leader's connected. And so we have somebody who's higher than us, a boss in a company, for instance. Even if I directly tell you something, I will tell my boss and expect that my boss will tell you, and expect that when you find out from our boss, that you'll react as if you never heard it before, because it needs to go through him, even though I've already told you. And so there's kind of this honorific thing that goes on. The third image, of course, is more of the connected network, all-channel network, where each person has access to each other. Those are simplified versions of network flow and communications in people groups. In actuality, there's a little bit of all 3 going on. There's a chain of communication that happens that either, by the way, that chain could be lateral. But a chain of communication that has to pass through certain sources, a centralized communication strategy, or an all-network communication strategy. So say I'd heard about this book, the 3D Gospel, and I was interested in it. I wanted to know something about it. As an individualist, what I would do is I would go and look up more information about it. I might go and look at it on Amazon, and I would see that out of 1,000 people who've rated this book, it's got a 4.7. And that's a pretty confidence boosting thing. So to the degree that I trust Amazon, and to the degree that I trust people who review on Amazon, and therefore I'm trusting a community of people I may not know, I'm going to say, okay, out of 1,000 ratings, a 4.7 out of 5 is a pretty good rating. It must be a pretty good book. I might feel that way. Same with Goodreads, 4.4 out of 1,235 ratings. And that's a pretty good rating on Goodreads. And so 2 networks I'm a part of have approved this book. Therefore, I'm going to say, well, it must be a fairly decent book. I could probably look into that book. I would also look at the editorial reviews. So these are statements that have been made by individuals who just wanted to say, yeah, I like this book, or asked what they thought about it, and this is the comment they made. Well, hey, I go into this one, and what the red lines there on this screen mean, or is that I actually know all these people or have met them before. I know Tom Steffen, I've met Judith Lingenfelter, and I've met Jack Wu. They're all part of the Evangelical Missiological Society, which I'm also a member of. So they're part of an in-group that I'm part of. And all three of them have said, this is a good book. And I'm like, okay, so people I know within the network I'm a part of think this is a good book. I go out on Google and I look up this book and try to get some reviews on it. And I find a couple other reviews. And one of those reviews is very negative, but I'm actually influenced by that as well, because it's a group of individuals who are pretty much against any sense of contextualization. And I've read much of what they've written, and I've disagreed with a lot of what they've written. And so I read the review there and I'm like, okay, it's an interesting review. I see the points you're trying to make, but I disagree with those points in general because of what I believe about contextualization in the gospel. I'm not in agreement with that group. I'm very seldom in agreement with that group. And yet I read their review anyway. And their review actually says to me, okay, maybe these people really don't like this book. Maybe it's a really good book. I might actually be influenced that way. So that's kind of how I, as an individualist, might get information as to whether this book is what I should purchase. And it's communication flow for decision-making processes that I'm focusing in on here. If I'm a collectivist, I'm going to either turn to the opinion of the group as a whole, and within my network, has anybody read this? Do we think it could be a good book? I'm going to strongly take that. An example I just gave you, the people who like that organization that takes a very negative view towards contextualization, the people who follow them on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else they are and read their blog and follow them regularly, those people are going to decide against this book before they even open and look at it because their in-group has told them it's not a good book. And the more collectivist minded we get, the more likely we are to be influenced that way. You can see what I mean by this generation in America is moving more collectivistic because we're creating these small social groups that have strong opinions and that narrowly approach other groups of individuals and very seldom listen to each other. Maybe I'm guilty of that too. But the more closed our group gets, the less likely we are to allow information from outside of our group. And that gets us more collectivist. I can't make that decision unless a group has a strong consensus that we could make that decision because I can't make it alone. When we talk about that strong centrality of communication, it might be that there's a strong collectivist leader within the group, and I can't do anything if the leader disapproves of the book. So even if other people in the group were interested, the leader would have to say yes or no before any of us would get into that. Now, while some societies function like that, as individualists in our society, we would look at that, we would say, wow, that's really cultic, that you would let one person have that much influence in life. But it's a way of life for some people in the world. Different ways of making decisions that communication influences. In addition, each group I'm a part of creates its own unique dialect. And now let's think about that in terms of communication. Think for a minute how you might communicate differently with different groups of friends that you belong to. Depending on the purpose of the group, the vocabulary is going to be different. For instance, if you regularly play tennis, the group of people you play tennis with will have a specific language that is only used about tennis. That language might not be understood with people outside of the group. There's terminology, there's certain individuals that you are really respect, admire. And somebody who doesn't play tennis might not even know those names and might not have any idea who you're talking about. Within that in-group that you're a part of, it shapes the language of the in-group and creates, in a way, a sub-dialect. So we all create these different dialects. And one of the ways it influences us is that we actually have to think without thinking. It's not so much a cognitive thought process, but we have to actually change our dialect between groups. So when I'm with this group of people, I talk one way, and when I'm with this group of people, I talk another way. And that's what sociologists call code switching, or style shifting is another term for it. And later on in the course, we'll talk about what Edward Hall called situational dialects. The important point right now is that your in-group influences how you communicate both within and outside your group. And so code switching is used to express solidarity and identity, as in this example. This is sometimes mocked, but this is actually an event that happened. Barack Obama was meeting officials of the USA Olympics, and as he was going down the row, shaking hands with different individuals, he saw Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant came towards him, and instead of just shaking his hands, he went into a full dap. And that greeting really showed an identity and a solidarity. It also showed an admiration, but often this is used as an example talking about how African Americans have to code shift within the dominant standard American English code. And then when they step back into a group of African Americans, they might go back into the language and physical expression of the language, which are part of the African American vernacular. And so there's a lot written about this, positive and negative. You can look up things about African American vernacular English versus standard American English and the code shifting that takes place. A lot of that is very normal. within any group of people. But when you have a multi-ethnic community, code shifting between the ethnic groups actually does become more prominent. That's true everywhere. One of the things that's happening right now is that linguists have identified what they call Miami English or Dade English. It's actually an interesting mix of English, Cuban and Venezuelan Spanish, and African American vernacular. And it all just kind of gets mixed up. And there's a whole way of speaking there that's become very popular, and it's now become the majority language of this Dade County area, Miami area. So it's not just kind of Spanglish where Spanish speakers are mixing English words in. It's where English speakers are mixing Spanish words in. So it's not uncommon for somebody in Dade County to say, get down from the car instead of get out of the car. And it's a direct translation of the Spanish. I've posted a short article for you to read from John McWhorter. He's a linguist that loves talking about the way language operates, and his blogs are very interesting. But he talks about this, and so some other examples are make a party for her, get married with me. So these are Spanish translations. The superlative from the Spanish, and then there's this word like and the way it's drawn out in the language. And traffic was like super bad this morning. And so you can see some things mixing in there and actual Spanish words. I would have been on time, pero like, there was no parking. And there's some great videos. I could not post any of the videos about this because they kind of tend to get a little colorful. Choose them wisely if you decide you want to review that at all. But it's an interesting phenomenon of an actual new dialect of English shaping in a mixing pot of people, where code shifting was taking place, and now people are choosing to mingle code rather than to shift code and making a deliberate, inclusive effort to do among multiple people groups within the community. It's not the first time that's happened. If you think about the English language, it was pretty much like this. What we know as the British Isles were originally populated by Britons, and their language still exists to some degree in Welsh and Cornwall, but it mixed with the Celtic as the Celts settled in France as the Gauls and in Ireland as the Celts. And then they had an influence on the Britons. And so Gaelic and Brittonic mixed together quite a bit. And then the Scotch Irish, and you had the invasion of the Angles and the Saxons and bringing their language with them. And then later on, you have the Danes coming in and the Norse coming in. So you have all these different linguistic minglings. And when we talk about the English language, it is actually a wild collection of those things. So some of our tenses are taken out of Norwegian languages. Some of our conjugations are taken out of German languages. Some of our conjugations are more out of the Celtic or the Brittonic languages of the past. And then there's also the mingling, because the Romans were there and they brought Latin in, but then later on in the Renaissance, there was inclusion of Renaissance languages. So French became a popular language and influenced English, and Latin became a popular language, and Greek among the learned. And so all of these things now became a part of our language. James Nichols said, English doesn't learn from other languages. English follows other languages down dark alleys, knocks them over, and goes through their pockets for loose grammar. That's a great statement. It's a really strong mixed language of code mixing rather than code shifting with each invasion of the British Isles. And it's continued. So as English came into the Americas, we picked up Native American words. We didn't so much pick up Native American grammar, interestingly, but we did pick up a lot of Native American words, and almost half of our state names come from Native American words. So here's some that you can see here. You can pause the video if you want to read them all, but some interesting ones there. I think Texas is interesting. It's from a tribal group called Tocado, and they had a word for friend, which was Teisha, and Teisha became the name for Texas, the place of friends. Okay, so those of you from Texas, that's where your name came from. Nebraska, from the Otoe people, and their word Nebraska, meaning flat water. Mississippi being Ojibwe, Mississippi, and Minnesota being from the Dakota Sioux, Minnesota, from the river sky-tinted water. The river itself has sky-tinted water is what they said. And Illinois, from the Illini people, and Illini means the best people. So look at the rest of those there. I think sometimes we don't even realize that those words are Native American words that were imported into our language. And a lot of place names in America are Native American place names. There's also a lot of borrowed words from other languages within English, like the words chocolate, canoe, raccoon, squash, and moose. Do you even think about those as being borrowed words? So they're just English words. They were originally Native Americans. In a similar way, the Africans who came as slaves brought with them pieces of their own languages that became popular words in English language in America, in the South especially. So you can recognize goober and gumbo, jumbo and zombie and banjo, all African words that were imported into America during the time of slavery. English borrowed words from other languages. So we picked up words like cookie from the Dutch, and bayou from the French, and bagel from Yiddish, and kindergarten from German, mosquito from Spanish, the boondock. This is one I actually discovered while I was living in the Philippines. because the Tagalog or Filipino word for mountain is bundok. We also have a word for head lice that's kutu, and from that we get our word kuti. Bungalow is actually both an Urdu and Hindi word. Shampoo is a Hindi word, so is pajama. And ski is a Scandinavian word. So these words became part of our language. We don't think of them as another language. And then we make up words like clickbait and athleisure and chillax and crowdfunding, makerspace, and then brand names like Kleenex and Venmo become action words. So you say, give me a Kleenex. You don't care if it's Target brand or Walmart brand or Kleenex brand. You just want a Kleenex. And you call it all Kleenex. When we go cross-culturally, are we practicing cultural appropriation? In some ways we are. If you recall, we talked about that earlier in the cultural anthropology. Again, talked about the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. And there's a concern sometimes with cultural appropriation, and what's going too far. And so we've said then that cultural appropriation was emulating the heritage of another culture without knowledge, understanding, and in a casual, mocking, or disrespectful way. So if you're taking stuff from another culture on and using it, but not in the way it was intended to be used and not using it respectfully, then you're using it wrongly. Be careful as you settle into your new culture. When you choose to wear traditional clothing, do you understand the meaning of that clothing? Do you understand who's allowed to wear that clothing? Do you have the right to wear that clothing? Is that clothing that a certain status wears that you don't have that status? It might be cool. You might think that's a great shirt. Now, where it becomes cultural appreciation is where you're actually showing that you're trying to fit in and have solidarity with the people. And sometimes that'll be through a gift anyway. I have several shirts from countries in Africa that I didn't purchase for myself. Somebody gave them to me because they wanted me to feel like I belong to them. And so they said, wear this because you're one of us. And that was their action. And then it's not appropriation. I'm not taking something away from their culture and trying to make it mine. I'm actually honoring the culture because I have friends within the culture who've allowed me to be a part of it. And that's the same with language. Just in conclusion then, our in-groups, our status, our networks can create barriers to communication. So our goal as intercultural communicators is to overcome those barriers as much as possible. Those barriers might include linguistic barriers. As you're learning a language, it's obviously a barrier. How do people perceive you as a foreigner? What's the way that you can reduce that perception and find a way that they will begin to honor you and include you in as one of them in any way you can, so that you're not relegated to that status of foreigner where you're not allowed to have the influence in their lives that you would like to have. But digging into the relationship that you need to give and the reciprocity of that relationship, and making sure you're willing to commit to a friendship, not just evangelize people on the surface by just speaking the gospel. Great, speak the gospel, don't hold back, but understand that they want more than just hearing words and knowledge. They want to know who you are and whether you're worth talking to, what the purpose of relationship with you, and whether it's worth their time investing in, and are you willing to invest in them? What are the in-group barriers that you have to overcome? What are the ways that you can get in to the network that they're a part of? And how do you build those relationships and find a place in that other culture? Finding a place in another culture is not always easy, but it's worth it. And again, allow yourself to change, because you're the one who has to change, not them, in order for you to be able to belong and communicate well with the people that God has called you to. Enjoy the journey.